On the Human podcast, I'll be bringing you interviews with both people you may know and people who have never been interviewed before in their life. I'll be asking them about the stories of their lives and helping you to understand who they are and why. Well, Richard, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Pleasure.
You are definitely one of the world's most interesting, I think, kind of fun psychologists, the different kind of topics that you talk about and do research about. I just want to start by kind of introducing the audience to a few of your achievements, because it is quite amazing, really. So you're Britain's only professor of the public understanding of psychology.
Yes, I've been that for many years.
You've written over 100 papers. You looked at areas such as magic, luck, paranormal, self-help, deception, lots of things. You've got a couple of YouTube channels and you've got, I think, about 500 million views on them, which is quite amazing. You've written more than a dozen books. And lastly, I think it's such an interesting one, is you're a member of the Magic Circle as well.
I am. I'm a member of the inner Magic Circle, which is the bit inside the Magic Circle. There's only about 200 of us.
Yeah. So, the first thing I want to ask you is, I want to understand a bit about your psychology. So I've listed all these things. What is it about you that has made you be able to do such an enormously wide range of interesting things?
That's a good question. I think the main thing is I've got a very short attention span. And so most academics will choose one topic fairly early on in their career and just keep drilling further and further down. Where once I've sort of looked at a topic for a while, or maybe a year or so, I tend to get quite bored and so switch to something else. So that's one part of it. The other part is that what drives it all forward is I think humans are actually quite interesting. And so I want to do psychology that kind of reflects that. And a lot of academic psychology, wonderful though it might be, doesn't do that. Actually, it's quite dull and it reduces people to just a bundle of numbers. And so I always wanted to do stuff which I used to read about psychology as a kid and read about magic, and it was always the fun, quirky experiments that got me excited. So I wanted to do the sorts of studies that I thought would excite other people and bring them into psychology. So I guess that's the kind of wraparound answer for all those things.
Sure. Yeah, you've looked at all these different things, as you say, because they're very interesting. Have there been any areas, though, that you've touched on that have been the most kind of rewarding and fulfilling to work on? Maybe some kind of areas that have helped people, perhaps on luck and so on?
Yeah, so my sort of trajectory was to start off, if we go way back, so I got into psychology because of magic. And not because of how magic works, which is how most psychologists who are into magic get into it. So you do a coin trick, you make it disappear. How come people look in a certain place and not another place? It wasn't that. As a sort of 8-year-old, 10-year-old kid, I was reading about magic and I came across this book. I said, if you want to be a good magician, you have to be likable, which is quite an alien thought to most magicians. And the reason you have to be likable is that you're doing a trick. People are going, how's that done? You go, I can't tell you. And they go, well, I hate you. That's normally how most magic tricks run. So being likable is helpful. And they said, there's this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that's the book I should read if you want to be likable. So I read that book by Dale Carnegie. And it's an amazing book. It's an astonishing book. Now it's a bit dated. It's written in the 30s. But still, it had all these very practical strategies about how to be likable and make friends and so on. And that was the book that got me into psychology. And so because of that, I always had this feeling that one should be doing things, and this gets back to your question, one should be doing things which have an impact on people's lives. So when I look back at all those projects, some of the early work was on the psychology of luck and what makes people lucky and how you can get them to be luckier. The 59-second stuff was on things you can learn in less than a minute that make you more productive or motivated or whatever it was. And the emails I get from people who say, I read that book, it turned my life around, those are the amazing moments. For me as an individual, not as a psychologist, but as an individual, you go, oh my goodness, how amazing is it that something that I thought of or I've written would have an impact on potentially large numbers of people. So I guess that's what kind of gets me out of bed in the morning.
Do any areas of research that you've worked on stand out as being the kind of the most challenging, the most difficult problems, questions, ideas to think about?
Well, all my early stuff was on the parapsychology, the paranormal. And so, again, I read this book, I got into psychology, I did study to degree in psychology, not very far from here, actually, University College London, chosen simply because it was very close to the magic circle, which is a terrible reason to choose a university, but that's why I went with it. And got to the end of that degree and didn't know what to do. And I think a lot of times when we're making these major life decisions, we overthink it. And so I've always been a fan of kind of relaxing, and I don't believe in manifesting or anything like that, but just seeing what comes up, conversations and opportunities. So I got to the end of my degree, didn't know what to do, and then I was walking along, and my friend was walking in the opposite direction and said, I was just thinking about you because there's a poster on the wall over there. There's a guy up in Edinburgh who wants somebody to look at the psychology of magic. And had I taken a different route, I hadn't bumped into that person, had they taken a different route or not noticed that poster, then everything would be different. But they did see the poster, they did mention it to me. The person who was advertising was Professor Robert Morris, who was the professor of parapsychology, which is paranormal stuff. He knew a lot of that stuff, the mediums, psychics were being faked, and he wanted someone to work on that. So I went to Edinburgh, which is where he was based, and for 4 years worked on parapsychology stuff. And so that, to get back to your question again, these very long answers, is that that stuff is challenging because I was very skeptical, I still am. You're dealing with people who really care about the paranormal, who've got maybe a kind of philosophy based around it. They've had odd experiences, they're convinced this stuff is true, and you're trying to get them to be a little bit more skeptical, a bit more rational in a gentle way. And that can be very challenging. So I did that for 10 years, 4 years in Edinburgh, and then came down to University of Hertfordshire, where I am now, and carried on that work for quite a while.
Before that, can you tell us a little bit about the magic that you did? So you performed a bit in Covent Garden, I think with a friend, and maybe tell us about what, when you were a child, got you interested in magic.
So it was my grandfather, and which is, for my generation, pretty much, ask any magician, it's always their grandfather. So I don't know what was happening there. But he wasn't a magician, but he knew one very good coin trick. And every weekend we go and visit him. He'd get me to put my initials on a Victorian penny, make it disappear, and then it would appear inside a box, essentially. And I'd pester him and say, how did you do this? And he would never tell me, even though he wasn't a magician. He just knew one trick, but he knew not to tell people. And eventually he said, well, the answer's in the book, and the book's in the local library. We didn't have the internet back then, so it was in the library. And I was not a big reader, so I'm dyslexic. I don't like reading particularly, but I was so motivated. So I went to the library and read all these books about magic and got hooked on magic. That's how I got into it. And then realised it was this really wonderfully bizarre, very close-knit community of individuals. And I got involved in that and joined the circle. And then, you're right, I did street magic in Covent Garden, again, not too far from here. That was a double act with a guy called Adrian Owen, who's now a very famous professor of neuroscience, did some very famous studies into brain scanning. Two of us did a double act. The two of us toured around the country with the Captain Fearless magic show that we put together. And yeah, that's how I got into it all.
What about your parents? I'm intrigued what they were like. Were they interested in psychology? Were they interested in magic? Anything interesting?
No, not at all. Working class background. Mum was a seamstress. Dad was an engineer. And what they were was very supportive of everything that I did. But no background in magic, no background in psychology at all. Was actually slightly anti the psychology, if anything, because I was doing maths, physics and chemistry at that time, and they thought that was a good thing to be doing. You have to remember back then, this was late 80s, mid-80s. Psychology wasn't the big topic that it is now, big subject. So it was a much more niche thing. There weren't that many people going into it. They didn't really know what it was, but they said, if you think that's going to make you happy, go and do it, which is not a bad piece of advice for anyone. So, and I just found it interesting. Unlike physics and chemistry, it seemed to me that people were inherently fascinating and inherently unpredictable. So that was the direction I headed off in. I only read one book on Introduction to Psychology before doing the degree, which is ridiculous. Don't do that. Read around a lot more before you make that decision. But I didn't. I just sort of trusted my gut feeling.
you made this decision to become a psychologist and not, become a full-time magician. It's the way of earning your living.
That was an easy one. Yes.
That was an easy one. Well, I was going to ask, do you ever regret that?
Not for 1 minute. I did earn my living as a magician, and it's really hard. It's a really hard way of earning a living. You're working when everyone else is having fun. It's stressful. You're traveling a lot. You have to be funny in front of a group of strangers. And then at one point, I got a gig at the Magic Castle, which is over in LA, West Coast. And I went over there to do this gig. And this is the kind of it's got mecca for magicians. It's the place all magicians hang out. So I got my act together and went over there. Stopped off in New York with Adrian Owen, who I'd mentioned before. The two of us went to Times Square, and there were people throwing the 3-card trick, the Find the Lady trick, and which you should never get involved in because you'll never win. It looks like you might do, but you won't. So I'm there with Adrian, counting all the gang members, all the people that are placing down money, they're in the gang. The people that are saying, it's obvious, the middle one, they're in the gang, the enforcers, the people looking out for the police. And I think we counted 12 people. Then I realised there were 13 because while I was counting the 12, someone stole my bag. So I'd lost everything, all the props, everything that I was going to perform at the castle. So I went from New York to LA with no props at all, and got there, went to a coffee shop, was sitting there pretty much in tears, and this very kind woman came across and said, "Why are you so upset?" I said, "Tonight I performed at the castle and I've got nothing. I've lost it all." And she said, "I'm not surprised you're upset because you're focusing on what you can't do. You cannot go and do the act you were intending to do tonight. It can't happen because you lost those props. What can you do?" It's a very simple shift in perspective. But it's one I've used many times. You can feel it in the room when everyone's like, "Well, we can't do this." And you go, "Great. So what can we do? What can we do in the next 24 hours? I thought, of course I can get a deck of cards and get some coins. I can put together 15 minutes for the show. So I went and did that. And worked at the castle and thought, this is not the life I want. It's that stressful, constantly travelling. I was talking to lots of professional magicians. And there was a magician there who's unfortunately recently passed away, Max Maven. And Max came up to me and said, "I don't think this is for you. What is it that you do?" I said, "I'm studying psychology." I think I just finished it then, actually. And he said, "Well, combine that. Combine the magic and the psychology. Now you're unique. There's lots of comedy magicians. There's lots of psychologists, but there's not that many psychologists into magic." And that was the penny dropping. And I thought, that's what I should do. And again, it's a good piece of advice. What are the two things that you could combine to make you unique? It's what I say to all my students. If you're studying psychology, what's your passion? Because whatever it is, you can probably combine it with psychology, and now you become a unique proposition. So yeah, that was how I got into it and why I don't do it. So I still do magic, mainly for magicians, actually, at magic conventions. It's a lovely thing to do occasionally, and I'd find it terrifying to earn a living.
What are some of the key things you've learned about how people behave and how people think from interacting with them as a magician? What does magic teach you about the way people think?
Well, it does teach you a lot about where people look, the assumptions they make, and so on. And all that stuff is kind of interesting. The psychology I don't find massively interesting. I mean, magicians are doing experiments all the time, and the experiments have to work 100% of the time. You have to be fooled by the trick. If anything, I'm a social psychologist. I'm interested in how people respond socially rather than what's called a cognitive psychologist, which might look at memory and attention and perception and so on. So I'm interested in is that human interaction. It gets all the way back to Dale Carnegie. When you show someone a trick, how do you do it in a way that they like you? And then they go, "Well, that was great. Show it to my friend," whatever. Because it can become a very poisonous interaction very quickly. And some magicians do make it into a very difficult one, such that lots of people don't enjoy magic tricks because they don't enjoy being around magicians. So that's what I'm most interested in. So even something as simple as, if you put a coin in your hand and I blow on it and it disappears, well, that's fine. But if I put the coin in my hand and get you to blow on it and it disappears. Now you did the magic. Now I'm more likable because I'm giving the kind of attribution to you. And in fact, the last show that I did at the Edinburgh Fringe was all about that. It was all about how you do magic in a way that people like it, not dislike it, how you co-create something with an audience. That's the psychology that fascinates me. The other stuff about where they look, what they're thinking, you have to know, but it doesn't. I haven't done much work into that.
Sure. You just mentioned the Edinburgh Fringe. I believe you were on the board of it and kind of helped direct it. How did that happen and what did that involve? And
sure, because of doing 4 years of my PhD up there, I eventually sort of moved and stayed up there. And I love the Fringe, which is the largest arts festival in the world. And so at some point, I thought it'd be nice to volunteer to spend some time trying to shape the Fringe, so it's a positive experience for not only the people attending, but for performers as well, because it's a very challenging environment for performers. And so, I was voted onto the board. I was there for 8 years with about, 12, 15 other people. And we helped to run the Edinburgh Fringe, which was terrifying. It was a month, thousands of shows, and millions of ticket sales and so on. It was great experience to see behind the scenes.
So obviously you're very interested in seeing magic as a performance, but comedy is something I believe you're very...
If you're referring to the Laugh Lab project, that, again... So I have this idea, which is a terrible idea, which is that you should deal with situations as they come up. So often I'm invited in to be an ideas person and come up with an idea for a show or project, whatever it is. And I try and stay away from thinking of solutions and closure before the day of the meeting. I try and have the meeting, the idea, as I walk into the meeting. And that approach has paid dividends, because otherwise you get closure too quickly, that you know the answer before you start, where you want to be in the moment. So many years ago, it must have been 99, I think, the British Association for the Advancement of Science wanted a big science experiment to run the course of the year, to get the whole public involved, mass participation, would have moments when journalists could write about different parts of the results, blah, blah, blah. And I'd come up with mass participation experiments many years prior to that. So I went in to pitch to them with no ideas at all until I walked through the door. And as I sat down, I said, "We're going to search for the world's funniest joke." And they just went, "Sold. That's the experiment we want." No idea how I was going to do it. I went back to the team at Hertfordshire. "So we're going to search the world's funniest joke." I said, "Great. How are we going to do it?" I said, "I've got no idea. That's what makes it exciting." And eventually we did a website that collected data, which back then was a very novel thing. We had to put somebody full-time on it to devise this site. And people came along, put in jokes, other people rated randomly selected jokes, and that became the Laugh Lab project for a year, which allowed us to announce the world's funniest joke, which isn't very funny. And it was this crazy year of getting into comedy, so it was great.
I don't think you're able to share with us that world's funniest joke. I think you said, look it up online.
No, I can't tell it. I can't tell it anymore. It's I spent probably a decade telling that joke. It's about two hunters. People can look it up, just put in Laugh Lab or World's Funniest Joke. It's not great, and so I slowly grew to hate it, and so now I don't tell the joke anymore. So, yeah, sorry about that.
That's all good. There was just this one little niche area of research, or at least thinking, you looked into that, or I asked you about briefly, which is the psychology of people who are helping with the kind of Apollo moon landing.
Oh, that was amazing.
Which is quite niche and unusual, but yeah, could you share a bit about what you learned there?
Oh, I love that project. I loved it. And it came about by chance. I mean, pretty much everything came about by chance. Originally I pitched a book on the paranormal, skeptical book on the paranormal. That was going to be my first book. No publisher would touch it. And it was only then that one publisher said, "What else are you working on?" I mentioned luck, and that became the luck factor. 59 Seconds was by chance. I went for a coffee with a friend of mine, CEO of a big organisation, and she said, "I'm very unhappy. What can I do to promote my happiness?" I started to explain. She looked at her watch and said, "Can you get a move on? I'm busy." I said, "How long have you got?" She said, "About a minute." And then I thought, that's a good hook. There's something in that. Apollo was the same. So I'm at a party with a friend of mine, comedian Helen Keane, who is an huge Apollo fan. And she's talking about the sort of technological benefits that came from Apollo. And I said, has anyone looked at the psychological benefits of achieving this amazing goal of putting a person on the moon? And she said, I don't think so. But you should talk to my friend Craig, who's befriended all of the Apollo 11 controllers, the people that sat there and actually essentially guided the entire mission. And so I got in touch with Craig, who's a lovely man, and Craig put me in touch with the controllers. And I interviewed them all about the Apollo mindset. How do you do something which at the time pretty much everyone decided was impossible? And it's incredible because they were in their early 20s when that was all happening, which in itself, you just think, what a stunning thought that this is, you're going to put whatever it is, 5% of the national budget, you're going to try and do this impossible thing. You've got the whole reputation of America riding on it, and you put a bunch of 20-year-olds involved, in charge. And part of it was because they thought, as one of them said to me, Jerry Bostic said to me, we're so young, we didn't know it couldn't be done. And just that optimism drove them forward. Where the older folks thought it's impossible, I'm not even going to try. So it was incredible talking to them, and that became Shoot for the Moon. And yes, it's lovely. All these things, all the projects have got their roots in chance kind of moments.
Yeah, you mentioned this 59 seconds, I think a minute ago, which has been great. So I've watched lots of these videos on YouTube that you've posted where you communicate an idea in 59 seconds.
We were doing shorts before everyone else was doing shorts.
The original shorts.
Yeah, because again, with that, so I got to know the folks at YouTube quite well because of the Quirkology channel, which had been quite successful. Everyone was saying, do long videos, because then you can run ads in them, and the longer the better. That was the absolute mantra. And for 59 seconds, obviously the title of the book, but also it just felt, and then again, it's another one of my little ideas, which is if you want to be creative, just do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. It's that simple. Look away what everyone else is doing and do the opposite. Everyone was doing long videos. I said, we're going to come in at 59 seconds. A, because it matches the book. B, because I think there's an audience for short fire, quick, boom, 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 stuff. So that's what we did. Yes, and we produced, I don't produce a lot of them. Yeah.
Can you share maybe just one or two of your favourite ideas that you can communicate under a minute that, could really help someone with their life or the way they think about something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them there. I mean, just if you want to cheer yourself up, acting like a happy person, putting a smile on your face, bringing your step, a bit of energy behind what you're doing. There's a thing called sort of feedback loop, which means it then starts to impact how you actually feel. So that was part of them. If you find yourself procrastinating about something, then just spend a minute. That's all it can take, a minute, just doing whatever it is that you don't want to do. Because as soon as you do that, the chances of finishing that task are much higher. The problem with procrastination is not starting in the first place. Just tell yourself, I'll just spend a minute doing it. And then that helps solve that. So that's all good. There's all the stuff about sort of surrounding yourself with greenery and creativity. So if you have plants in the office or just even the colour green around you, you become more creative. Red has the opposite effect. It focuses attention. Green tends to, the attentional spotlight is much larger. So yeah, we lined up, I don't know how many videos, a lot. And then a company came along called Cognitive Media at the time, and they did the animations for us. And again, at a time when people weren't really putting animations into videos. So yeah, we put them out, and it turns out there was an audience for it.
Yeah, certainly was. This other channel as well, you have a separate channel, Quirkology, which is filled with just these amazing like optical illusions and tricks and things like this. Like these optical illusions obviously seem very related to magic, but like slightly different perhaps, like that you kind of, like what's the interest there? Is it easily connected to magic? Is it something else, this kind of visual?
Quirkology came about because I wanted to show people how wonderful magic was. Problem is you can't expose magic tricks, not ethically. And also the methods are quite dirty in the sense of you show people how tricks done, and that sense of wonder just goes down to, Oh, right. How's that other one done? So I didn't want to go into that territory. So instead I created illusions where the effect, the kind of magical bit, is fine, but the method, how it's done, is more interesting than the effect. And that's very unusual within psychology, within magic and psychology. So I created those. We put them out. I think the first one was the colour-changing card trick, which I think would change blindness. And you have to remember, we're only, I think, 2 years off of the birth of YouTube. We were very, very early adopters. So I put this thing out, put this video out, went to bed, woke up, as 250,000 views. And I thought I couldn't get my head around it. I just didn't understand the number. I thought, what's that mean? And it turns out people had shared it and so on. And then, yeah, we just started producing more and more of these things. And thank goodness, people really, really enjoyed them. So it's great. And then, I don't know how many years into it, I think a journalist friend of mine rang me up, it was by Christmas time, and said, have you got any sort of stories around Christmas? And I said, well, there's these old sort of Christmas stunts that you perform in Victorian times. I've got loads of these books of these stunts. Why they're so old, they're new. Why don't we just write up a few of them? So we wrote those up. And that article went down very well. And that then morphed into 10 bets you'll always win, which we took the same stunts and just reframed them as bets. Challenge your friend to whatever it is, pick up coins with their hands and in this particular way. When they can't do it, here's the answer. And boy, that's what made the channel absolutely rocket away. And fun enough, they're still coming up on, other people have taken them now and repurposed them. I still see them on Facebook, and they put different voiceovers on them and so on. So yeah, it just seems strange that stuff. It's why I like it versus television. I did quite a lot of TV back then, but it all vanishes. You do it, it's gone. Where this stuff, it sticks around, it's evergreen, and it's still, hopefully, kids are still watching it and finding it vaguely amusing.
Yeah, you just mentioned television then, reminded me to ask you something, which is, am I right that you've been a kind of creative consultant for some magic things involving, is one of them Derren Brown? Have you helped him with?
Yeah, a couple of TV things, yeah.
Are you able to share any of the stuff you've done with him?
Yeah, so Derren and I go back to his very first special, which I think was called Mind Games. And I'm on it. If you watch that first special, he came to the university.
Is it with the twin study?
The twin study, that's right. And so to establish that illusion, I think the viewers needed to know that he hadn't briefed the twins beforehand. I think that was the little bit. So I just did a bit with Derren where I said, no, you haven't met these people before or something. We tried to do this bit and we couldn't do it for laughing. It was absolutely true. He hadn't met the people before. It wasn't that. We just got on very well. He's a very funny man and we sort of shared a background in magic and so have become pals since then. He's an amazingly talented performer. I mean, incredible. Must be one of the best live performers in the last century in terms of the UK and let alone just within magic. So then there are a couple of other shows. He did one on a psychic. He did one on luck, actually. And so obviously my little fingerprints are over that. I don't think I've helped out with any of the live shows, but some of the TV stuff, yeah.
So, I mean, Derren's obviously very successful. And we've hopped around so many things in this conversation because you've had your finger, you've done so many different things. I just want to connect the idea of like success and achievement in lots of different areas to some of the thinking you've done around luck. So, are you and Derren lucky people? Have you created your own luck? Is that the same thing? Can you explain success through this idea of luck?
The Luck Project was about interviewing lucky and unlucky people about their good and bad luck. And my argument, I wasn't the first to make it, but it was that for the most part, people make their own luck by the way they think and behave. Not true of everything in life, but many things. And we looked at the traits of lucky people. One of the traits of lucky people is that they're quite intuitive. Another is they work really, really hard. And I think, Derren works incredibly hard. What's interesting about Derren's work is if you see the show on the opening night, the live show, and then you see it a few months later, he's changed everything. he's constantly going about, that didn't quite work, change that wording, change this, change that. It's a constant process of evolution. It's really hard work, I would imagine. And it's the same with my stuff. When we sit here and talk about one project in one experiment in 59 seconds or something, it's always funny to me because that would take at least a month to carry out. And so what boils down to 30 seconds actually is a huge amount of work. There's a lot of them. And we're only talking about the successes. There's been a lot of failures in there where a project didn't go anywhere or an idea didn't take off. And so, yes, it's been and continues to be hard work. And I would think was quite similar, I don't know about Derren stuff because I don't know, but mine is I'm quite flexible, which is good because it responds to being in the moment. It's bad for people that work with me because they've got used to it over the years. On 1 minute to midnight when we're just about to run a big ghost investigation or whatever it is, I'll go, you know what? It's a better way of doing this. And I expect everyone to pivot. If we all agree it's a better thing to do, we all pivot into that. I think it's a mistake to plough forward when there's a better idea there. And not many people do that. They tend to, well, this is what we're about. And not also remembering why you did it in the first place. What's the why? What are you actually trying to achieve? Start with the end in mind. I think that's extremely helpful. Otherwise, you just end up engaged in activity. We can all fill our days, but we have to fill our days with meaningful activity, knowing why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that ability to pivot after you've done so much work, at the last minute. Are you a bit of a perfectionist? Do you have extremely high standards? Do you just can't resist changing if you know it's the truth?
I don't think I am a perfectionist, actually. I think it is annoying for people that work with me. But it's to do with if it is a better idea, and it might not come from me, it might come from a member of the team or somebody else. You go, you know what, look, let's not get caught up on sunk costs. Let's not go, well, we've invested this much already, let's carry on. It's like, no, there's an easier path through. If it gets too difficult, I just stop. There's because it might not be the moment. Maybe it's a good idea, but it's not a good idea this week, maybe it will next year or the year after. There'll be an easier path through. We just need to find it. If it feels like banging your head against a brick wall and you're pushing too much, then I tend to back off. So those 1 minute to midnight is normally when I think we're pushing in the wrong direction. Oh, hold on a minute. There's another easier way over here. It's sometimes hard to take people with you on that journey.
So it sounds like you've been extremely busy throughout your career. Are you someone that's able to deal with this quite well? Has it been quite stressful at times? How have you managed?
It's not particularly stressful. I give talks. I talk a lot. I always joke that giving the talk to, I don't know, sometimes a couple hundred people, sometimes 1,000 people, whatever, that's not stressful. It's getting there that's stressful on time. That's a bit of uncertainty. Once you're there, it's just enjoyable. No, I think pretty much everyone who's done a lot will say, if you enjoy it, then you bring much more to the party than not enjoying it, in which case it's work, in which case I'm probably not a sort of particularly driven person. But I really enjoy doing this stuff and continue to, which I find amazing. I mean, it's coming up for almost 40 years now of doing this stuff, and I still get up and think, oh, wouldn't it be fun? I've just submitted a paper yesterday and had another one accepted the day before. Still sort of producing this stuff, not because I have to, but because I think, oh, that's really interesting. Let's look at that.
One thing I've heard you say that I thought, here's how you've earned a little bit of time back, is you don't watch any TV and you don't listen to the radio and you don't listen to podcasts. Why is that? You're just too absorbed in your work and reading?
It's not entirely true. I do watch some YouTube stuff, but it's pretty much true. Well, one is I haven't taken a holiday for 30-something years. Last year, Caroline, my partner, and I took 4 days. That's the first time we've been on holiday. So that's part of it. And we didn't really know what to do with ourselves, actually. We sort of hadn't quite got our head around what the idea of a holiday was, and so it took us a while. It took us 4 days, actually, by the end of that. It was time to finish. So that's part of it. Yeah, I don't watch much TV or don't listen to anything on the radio or particularly podcasts. I'm quite busy, and that feels a sort of a passive thing. And the other thing is, the worry is you start to have your agenda driven by other people. Well, I don't really want to do that. I want to be making up my own mind and thinking things through. Where, put it like this, I'd rather come up with an idea and be told it was on the radio 3 years ago than listen to it 3 years ago and then think, oh, actually, I'll use that idea. So, I frequently come up with things that people that's already been done. And you go, well, at least I'm on the right track then if someone got as far as making it.
This thing you said about the holidays is super interesting. Do you mean you'd gone abroad for the first time in 30 years, or you just had more
than
a weekend off? What did you mean by holiday exactly?
Yeah, it was that. It was the 4 days in Norfolk.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Apart from that, apart from weekends, every single week.
No, we work every weekend.
Work every weekend as well. Okay.
Oh yeah, we don't take time off. I mean, when you, I used to. I don't so much now since the pandemic, but I used to travel a lot. I mean, like on the road a lot. And when you do that, to be honest, I'm being a little bit flippant about holidays. When you travel so much for your work, actually the holidays sort of not traveling, getting on another plane or train or whatever. But no, I think that was the first 4 days we'd taken.
And towards the end, you felt ready to get back to...
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of psychology about that. The 4 days is actually as good as 2 weeks. Because after that, you think, oh, it was a good little break. Even one night is a good break away from things. But it's not me being a martyr. It's just that I enjoy what I'm doing more than taking a holiday. Otherwise, I'd have taken holidays. You know, I just enjoy what I'm doing. If I don't, then I'll be taking more holidays.
Okay, on to a couple final questions. A bit of a broad on this, but you've obviously learned a lot about psychology throughout your career. Can you talk at all about how this has impacted you personally in your perhaps relationships, how you interact with people, how you think about your own life? Any kind of interesting things stand out here?
I mean, there's all joke about psychologists study the thing that they themselves are most efficient in. I don't think... I mean, there's a few little bits and pieces, I guess, on the persuasion front. I mean, there's use of the word willing is good. If you want someone to do something, you say, would you be willing to give that a try? And it's little things like that, maybe. But generally, they're lessons learned not through reading psychology papers, but through doing. Doing is very important. So, you know, I will never forget the woman that came over at the castle and said, you're focusing on what you can't do, focus on what you can do. Or the role that chance and opportunity have played in my life, or sitting down and going, we're going to find the world's funniest joke. Right, you got the whole thing. Great. Now we're going to have to make this work. So those are the things which I think we touched on quite a few of them, little learnings, as it were, but they come through doing. I say to students, you know, don't overanalyze it. Just get out there and start doing, because when you start doing, you learn, but also you attract other people to you who want to do a similar thing. Magic's a good example. You sit at home and think about it as much as you like, but at some point you have to leave your home and do magic for real people in the real world, and then life is very different at that point. You learn through doing.
How do you think your friends and family would describe you?
It depends whether I'm going to hear about it. I've got absolutely no idea, and as long as they remain my friends and family, I'm not certain I would mind very much. I don't know. I honestly, I have never ever thought about that question. I try and keep relationships. I think it's the most important thing, and I mean that in the broadest sense, is that people enjoy working with you or have a good time. Then you can go back to them in the future, or they'll go, oh, let's get Richard involved in something. And so I think relationships in that broad sense are incredibly important. I mean, probably in the number one slot is that you want people to have a good time, and you deliver the goods and so on, in order that, you can go back to that person in the future, they can come back to you. There's too many people that burn their boats along the way, and then they've got nothing at the end of it.
I always end the show asking the same question. Final question, Richard, is what do you think it means to live a good life?
Well, I think it's a life that you find interesting, that is meaningful for you, and that doesn't impact negatively on others. And so it may not help them, but I don't think you don't need to help them. If you can help them, that's better. But I think just from your perspective, if it's meaningful, if you understand why you're doing what you're doing, you enjoy every moment of it. Time whizzes by when you're doing those things. You've figured out a way of doing for a living what makes you happy when you're not getting paid for it. All those things to me would contribute to a meaningful life.
Well, Richard, thank you so much. It's been very wide-ranging and interesting chat. Thanks for your great work and time today.
Pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview. If you did, please support the channel by hitting the subscribe button below. See you next time.